everyone, welcome to my channel. So in today's video, I am super excited to share with you guys a roundup of all 35 of my Sonia G brushes. So Sonia G is one of my all-time favorite brush brands. I've collected a really significant portion of all of her brushes, especially the newer releases. And so I wanted to run through all of these brushes with you guys today, do some demos, and share with you guys my updated impressions. If you are interested in more detailed, in-depth reviews of some of these brush sets, I do have some dedicated videos to a lot of them. And also let me know if you guys would be interested in like a top 10 or something like that. But for today's video, I wanted to run through all of them since I know that it can be kind of overwhelming looking at the website and seeing all of these different brushes. And even for myself, I tend to fall into a rut of primarily using the same brushes every day. So I think this will also be helpful just to remind myself of all the different brushes I have and share with you guys my holistic impressions. So without further ado, if you're interested in learning more about Sonia G brushes, then just stick around. So I have all my brushes laid out in front of me based on what purposes they have. So that way, as I do each step of my routine, I'll talk through the brushes that I would use for that. So first off, I have two brushes that are for foundation. So first we have this base brush from her Lotus collection. I bought the entire Lotus collection when it came out, but you can now buy these individually. In addition, I have her Jumbo base from her Keyaki set. This now I think is also sold in a full size. The Keyaki ones are the travel size ones with the shorter handles. So I'm going to start by pumping out some of my Kogan Do Aqua foundation. This is one of my current favorite foundations. I have this in shade 123. As always, the products I use will be listed in the description box below. I'm going to start by just using this Jumbo Lotus brush to show you guys how this blends in. So I really like the utility of this brush. As you can see, it's really nice for navigating the contours of your face, especially if you're like me and you have a bit of a smaller face and you sometimes find that foundation brushes struggle to really get into the crevices of your face. This is a really nice shape for that. It's also super soft and feels very luxurious on the skin. Now that said, this is my first time using this brush in quite a while, just because in general, I don't actually use that many brushes from the Sonia G Fusion line. So that's her line that's mixed synthetic and real hair, which can be used for liquid and cream products. And that's just because I find that the product really gets into the bristles. I don't know if you guys can see kind of how wet this brush is looking now. But this brush in particular, I find a little bit finicky to clean because it does have this rounded part of the ferrule. And so if you want to like clean the bristles all the way, it's hard to avoid getting water into the ferrule, which is something I try to avoid. And in general, I am a little bit precious with my brushes, so I feel like when it comes to just using foundation once, I really don't want to have to scrub my brushes a lot just to get the product out. So typically I do end up going in more so with my BK Beauty brushes, which are synthetic hair and easier to clean and also just less expensive and luxurious. Or I just go in with a sponge. And so in reality, I don't actually use either of these for foundation that often. Now, if you are someone who likes using natural hair brushes for your cream or liquid products and you don't mind the cleaning process, I do think both of these are really excellent. This one especially is very multifunctional if you want to use one brush for all of your cream and liquid products. It has a really nice sort of angle to it that gives it a almost cat's paw like effect on the skin. It's small enough to still be able to navigate the contours of your face, but it's big enough to make really quick work of it. And as I'll show you guys shortly as well, it's fairly nice for stamping on bronzer or blush as well. It's a very good shape for that. So on the whole, I do really enjoy both of these brushes. And I think when it comes to any sort of natural synthetic hair hybrids, if you want a very luxurious experience in applying your products, these will definitely give it to you. It's really just a matter of how you feel about the cleaning process. Basically, the reason these brushes feel so nice on the skin is they are very tightly bundled. They do have a lot of density to them, but that is also what makes them a lot harder to clean than most of my other brushes. But as you can see, they do a beautiful job of very quickly just blending out to your product. So moving right along, I have two brushes for concealer. So in the Keyaki set, I have the Jumbo Worker brush. This can also technically be used for eyeshadow, but it's a bit large for my eyes for that purpose. And then I also have the soft concealer brush, which is a bit smaller and more precise. So I'm gonna just go in with some of my Kogan Do liquid concealer under the eyes and around my problem areas. Then on this side, go with the Jumbo Worker. This is a bit of a fluffier brush. It's gonna give a little bit of a lighter application in comparison to the soft concealer brush. But you can see it very quickly blends things out just with that extra added wispiness. And then on the other side, I'm going in with the soft concealer. This definitely has more heft to it. So it's gonna give you more of sort of a pinpoint precision with your application. With both of these, I like to use a little bit of a pouncing motion so I don't lose the coverage. And both are super, super soft on the skin, so it is a very nice application experience. Now moving on to cream blush and bronzer, I have here my Makeup Forever palette, which has a lot of different shades in it. So I'm gonna go in with that Jumbo base into this sort of contour shade over here, and just use this to pounce some of that in the hollows of my cheeks. This is the perfect shape and size for this sort of use case. It is really nice that she has this in the Keyaki set, because if you are someone who uses a lot of cream and liquid products, when you travel and you just want one brush that can kind of do a full face of makeup, other than the eyes, then this is a really great brush for that. Personally, that's not my style, just because, like I said, I'm not a big fan of having to constantly wash my brushes, especially when I'm traveling. So I don't actually end up bringing this with me, but if you are partial to cream and liquids, this is amazing. And you can see just how smooth that blend is because of the density of this brush. I'm also going to take some on this brush as well and show you guys that down the bridge of the nose. This is sort of the perfect shape and size for that nose contour area. If you want something a bit more precise, so you can see how that just makes things more defined. We actually turn down the brightness a little bit. There we go. Similarly, if you want a more chiseled look, you can also use this over here to provide a more chiseled effect on the cheeks if you want to really control where that contour is. But overall, both of these brushes are really nice for all cream and liquids. And then I also have here the mini base brush. This is also in the Keyaki line and the full size line. This is also a very good multitasker. You can use this for your foundation, your concealer, your cream bronzer, cream blush, really anything. Personally, I don't like this as much as the other brushes I showed you guys. This is sort of a jack of all trades, master of none. So it's really good if you really just want one brush for everything. Like, you know, obviously these two can do almost everything, but they're not going to be able to do that really precise concealer or highlight. Whereas this can literally do everything, just maybe not as well. Like, it takes a while to get all the foundation on, and I feel like the application for blush and bronzer is a little bit less smooth with this because you're dotting it on the face, but still really nice brush overall. So for today's look, I'm just going to use this with my RMS Modest blush, which is this red cream blush. It's a nice size to dip into these small pans, and I'm just going to dab some of this on. Okay, that's not really picking up. Let me really dig in there a little bit more. I am trying to keep the creams and liquids a little bit light today, just because I'm going in with powder later. I have a ton of face powder brushes from Sonia G, as you guys can imagine. Although this is still a lot lighter than I was anticipating. I think you guys can just see how it's a little bit more work to use this brush to apply the product. There is a lot more kind of sweeping around involved. A bit more buffing into the skin. But again, if you just want one brush for everything, this is probably the most versatile one in the cream and liquid department from Sonia G. Alrighty, so here we have all the creams and liquids down. I'm gonna go off camera to do my brows and then be back for all of the powder products. So now let's get into face powder. So this is definitely the section that I have the most brushes for. I really, really love Sonia G's face brushes, and I've accumulated probably close to all of them at this point. But let's first start with the smaller ones that can be used in the under eye area. So one of my favorite brushes for this use case is this smaller brush from her Hinoki line. You can see this is really beautiful, has that crane design. This is a very luxurious brush, so at first I wasn't sure if I was comfortable using it for setting powder, since when I'm setting my face, the bristles always pick up a little bit of foundation, which is not great for them. But the shape is just so perfect for this under eye area that I do really like using this for this purpose. So I just have here my M Cosmetics Portrait Mode powder. So I'm going to use this just to set the under eye area. You can see just how nicely this fits in this area. This brush is also really nice for just kind of setting around the center of the face. It would take quite a while to set your entire face with this brush, but it's perfect for those smaller areas that can be harder for larger brushes to get into. Now, this is a brush that I primarily use on days when I'm feeling a little bit fancy, because as you guys can see, you know, it mainly does that purpose. Like, you can also use this for contour and blush, but I find it's not the best at those purposes. So on a day when I'm trying to do my makeup quickly and use as few brushes as possible, this is definitely not one I reach for. But on days when I really just want that perfect application around the center of my face, this is really great for that. Now, the other smaller face brushes I have from Sonia G are all a lot more multi-purpose, I would say. So one of my all-time favorite brushes from Sonia G is this detail brush. This is one I always bring with me traveling because this shape and size is perfect for so many use cases. So similar to the Hinoki brush, this small size and shape is really nice for the under eye area. It's definitely very good at setting small parts of the face. But this is also really good for nose bridge contour, for contouring the face, for blush, for highlight. So especially when I'm traveling, this is one I feel like I can do everything with. It does take a little bit of time to set the whole face, but the shape is very good for those other use cases as well, whereas the Hinoki brush is less good at the face contouring. So I would highly recommend this brush if you want more of a one and done. Next, we have the Detail Pro. This basically looks like a really, really big blender brush. For my face, I primarily use this for nose bridge contour and then for highlight. So it's not as multi-purpose, but it's really, really good at those two use cases, especially if you want a more diffused application of nose contour. This definitely has you covered. It can really nicely just provide a softer effect on the nose because it is quite fluffy. In addition, we have these two very multifunctional brushes from the Keyaki set. So we have the soft face over here and then the classic face. These I also really enjoy traveling with. I don't actually use these when I'm at home because I feel like they're a little small for certain purposes, but they are just very good workhorse brushes. So when I'm traveling, I feel like with these, I can do any sort of powder task. I can do all over face powder, under eye face powder with this one at least, and then I can do blush and bronzer with both of these. Usually when I'm at home, I like to use a bigger brush for all over face powder and a smaller brush for under the eyes and around the nose. But if I can only have one brush, these two are really great for that as well. And then finally in this category, we have the Designer Pro. This is a very flexible brush in terms of what you can do. It has a slightly pinched ferrule, so it has a smaller side and a bigger side. For me, that's what I'm looking for in brushes that are more versatile, because again, it can get into sort of smaller areas of the face, but also make quick work of the larger areas. For me though, this is primarily a powder in the center of the face, plus occasionally blush and highlight brush. And I normally don't travel with this just because the detail brush is a lot more versatile. Now getting into larger brushes, so let's first talk about the Face Pro. I absolutely love this brush. I would say if you only want to buy one larger face brush from Sonia G, this is the one I would recommend because this brush can basically do everything. So as you can see, compared to the ones I just showed you, this one is a lot larger. And so if you're going to powder your entire face, this is the way to go. It just makes very quick work of this, whereas any of those smaller brushes would take a lot more time. That said, this is also one of my all-time favorite bronzer brushes. So if you guys watched my top 5 bronzer brush video, you know that there's several Sonia G brushes in that category. So we also have her Jumbo Bronze and her Niji Pro. So these are all really brilliant bronzer brushes, and I feel like they all have their place in a collection. Basically, the Niji is really great if you have bronzers that need buffing and you also want sort of a more precise application. Since this one's the most pinched, it's also the most dense, and so wherever you put that product, it's going to stay. If you want something that is just a lot more precise, then this is kind of the way to go. This one's especially good at contouring the cheek area because that's where you don't necessarily want the product to go everywhere. The Jumbo Bronze is better if you want a more diffuse application. So for example, if you want something that's kind of more along the hairline and you don't really want it to be too precise, this is going to give you that more all over bronze look. If you're someone, for example, who just likes sweeping bronzer all over your face to get that sun-kissed vibe, then this is going to be a lot better for you than the Niji Pro because it's going to give a softer application with more surface area. But if you just want one, I would say the Face Pro is the perfect in-between. Because it is a little bit pinched, it's not going to be as fluffy as the Jumbo Pro. It's going to be a bit more controlled, but it's still a lot wispier than the Jumbo Bronze. And for me, I find myself reaching for this the most because if I don't really want to think much about, oh, like which formula am I using and which brush would be best for it, this is just really good at pretty much any formula, any sort of situation, which on most days is what I want, just something that's very consistent. I also really love this one for blush because the size and shape is pretty good for that as well. Whereas I find with these two, they're less suitable, at least for my face shape, for blush. And so I can really use this for pretty much everything. Another bronzer brush though that I've been reaching for a lot, in fact the one I've probably been using the most recently, is the Fan L from Sonia G. So if you are someone who wants a bit more of a chiseled look, then this one is perfect. So especially if you want to be contouring instead of bronzing, this one really navigates the face beautifully and it gives you that precision in terms of where you want to place your product. So I really, really love this, and ever since I've gotten this, it's been the one I've been going for the most because as you can see, it makes very quick work of bronzer. You can just sweep it in all of the contours of your face and it's super, super soft. And the bristles are stiff enough that it really kind of buffs out the product as you apply it. So if you're someone who struggles at all with bronzer and you want a brush that's just truly exceptional for that one purpose, then I think this is the way to go, especially for more of a bronzer look. Whereas if you want something that's more like all over face powder, bronzer, and blush, then the Face Pro I think is the way to go. Two other fan brushes that I recently got from Sonia G include the Fan M and Fan A. And I would say the Fan M is a really lovely brush, but one that honestly I haven't gotten much use from, just because I find that I'm constantly using these two, this one for kind of all over application, and this one is like the absolute perfect brush for doing nose contour. Like you really cannot imagine a more perfect shape than this for that very specific purpose. This is also great for applying highlight on the nose. So usually with these two brushes, I can do all of the contouring that I want. And so I just never really end up reaching for this one. That said, I do think this one is a very good in-between. If you wanted to be able to do both things and not buy two brushes, this one is quite good. In the face area, it's large enough to be able to do contour throughout your face, but it's also small enough to be able to get the nose area. Whereas I find with this brush, at least for me, this is a little bit too big. But in general, I do recommend looking into these brushes, and I do have a dedicated video to them in case you guys are interested. I just think they're some of the most unique shapes in Sonia G's collection that you really can't get from other brands. So next we have the other Hinoki brush. This is the larger Hinoki brush from Sonia G. This, unfortunately, I would say is maybe one of the few fails I have in my collection. So as you can see, there's like a lot of little bristles that are always falling out from this. I feel like even though I've had this now for several months, maybe even a year, it's always shedding. Every single time I've used it, it still sheds, which is honestly pretty worrisome. It's a very luxurious, very soft, quite dense brush, but every time I use it, it always ends up shedding quite a bit. And I find that this is not amazing at any particular purpose. Because of its density, it picks up a lot of powder, which can be a little bit hard to control. So I don't like this for face powder. I feel like it just leaves certain areas too dry and certain areas not set. It's also not good for bronzer in my experience because of just how the initial laydown is too intense. It's a decent blush brush, but not my favorite. As I'll talk about in a moment, there are brushes that I think are amazing from Sonia G for blush. So in general, I personally cannot recommend this brush, unfortunately. It's very, very beautiful. Like, I don't regret getting this set just because the set itself is so gorgeous. And I do really love the smaller Hinoki brush. But this guy, I pretty much never reach for compared to any of my other Sonia G brushes. In terms of blush, one of my all-time favorite shapes from Sonia G is this Chic Pro. So I have two of them, one from the Lotus set and one from her Pro line. And they're basically the same, except this one has dyed hair and this one has undyed goat hair. But this is one of my overall favorite brushes for blush. I find it's just the perfect size and shape to be able to pick up pretty much any blush formula and lay it down precisely, but also it's big enough that I don't feel like I'm just sitting here all day applying layer after layer. It's extremely soft and allows you to just kind of lightly apply as many layers as you want, but it's also stiff enough that it allows you to buff out any harsh edges, which I think is really important for versatility because I do have some blush formulas that can be more finicky. And so this just does both things. It's really great for soft laydown, but also for buffing. Just really, really nice and versatile. You can see just how quickly and easily that laid down this blush, the Dior one. So even though I normally don't like having repeats in my collection, I actually do enjoy having two of these. So the final powder brush I have is this Buffer Pro, which is a unique flat top brush. And I would say that I have kind of a mixed relationship with this brush. I don't use it that often. When I use it, it's for finishing powders. So that's kind of the one use case I found for it. And finishing powder is not something I always use. It's really something I only use if I'm feeling like doing a very glam look where I want to do all of the steps and pull out all the bells and whistles. But this is very good for that purpose. So when it comes to finishing powder, I always go in with Hourglass. So this is my Elephant palette. And I just kind of sweep this into the pans. These pans are a little bit small for this size. And so I like using this with the ones where I have two of the finishing powders side by side. So that way I can just easily sweep it in both. And then I just kind of use this all over the face. Now, the one thing I don't love about this brush is because it's kind of big, it's very hard to get any of the powder around the center of my face. It's really perfect for these larger areas like my forehead or my jawline. But when it comes to the center, it's like, you know, kind of finicky. And so I find when I use this, it's very quick, you know, just like this, that's kind of what it's able to do. And then I do, if I want to kind of continue the finishing powder vibe, need to go in with a smaller brush, like maybe my Designer Pro, and then sweep that along the center of the face. And as a result, it's just a little bit finicky to use because I can't use it for everything. I have to go in with another brush as well for finishing powder. But if you are someone who maybe has a slightly larger face than me, or you don't mind using like a bunch of brushes in your makeup routine, this is really good for that very quick, just buffing the finishing powder into the face final step. Now, I didn't do it today, but if you did have harsh edges, you could also really use this in circular motions to buff things out. But I would say for me, it's sort of a nice to have in my collection rather than anything essential. So that is all of my face brushes. We are in the home stretch, guys. Let's just go into the eyeshadow right now. And eyeshadow is surprisingly an area where I don't have as many brushes that I love from Sonia G. There's certain tasks in the eye area that I have a bunch of things I like from her, but the one area I find a bit lacking in her collection is shadows for the placement of mattes in the crease. So let's first start with some of the bigger eyeshadow brushes she has. So I have here the Jumbo Blender brush from her Keyaki line, and also the Worker brush from her Lotus collection. These are very similar brushes. They're that kind of fingertip design that you can use to kind of place shadow like this and then sweep it across your crease. So these are good for one and dones, but also if you want to do that initial transition shade placement. And that's what I'm going to do today because we have too many brushes for me to just do a one and done for you guys. So I'm going to go into my Bronze Seduction palette from Pat McGrath. Surprisingly, I haven't broken this out in quite a while. This is a palette with very pigmented mattes, so this is going to be a little bit of a challenge for these brushes, but I did just want to use this today. So I'm just going to use this to initially place the shadow down. Now, normally my preference with eyeshadows is to actually use a very large, fluffy crease brush for this sort of purpose. And as I'll talk about shortly, I don't actually like any of the crease brushes from Sonia G. That's the one area of her line that I've been kind of disappointed in. I much prefer my crease brushes from Refer and from Wayne Goss, at least his original line that had a ton of crease brushes. So when it comes to Sonia G, I usually don't use her brushes for this initial purpose. And you can see some of the issues I'm having already just with blendability here. Like this shape is pretty good for that kind of initial laydown, but it's not great for having that really nice wispy effect in the socket area. Now I will try blending that out with the crease brushes I do have from her. So these are the three that I have. I have the classic crease, that's this blue one here, and then I have the Blender Pro, and I have this Keyaki crease brush as well. These are all honestly very similar. The classic crease just has a little bit more of a domed top compared to the other ones, but they work all kind of about the same. The Keyaki one is the wispiest and the smallest of the three. So I'm gonna just go in with this Blender Pro first and try to work out the edges. Basically, the way Sonia G does her eyeshadow is just a little bit different from me, which kind of informs the process. So the way she does it is kind of like what I'm doing right now, where the idea is you first lay down the pigment and then you really go and buff it in separately. And so her preference is for these sorts of brushes that lay down pigment more heavily and then are good at buffing. For me personally, I do have a preference for brushes that just lay down lighter layers instead. Because as you can see, I am just having trouble here where some of the product caught on my eye and now it looks really muddy and I can't really blend it out. Again, this is not 100% the brush's fault because this palette is kind of hard to use in terms of the initial transition placement. And I should be fine once I cover that up with shimmers, but you know, overall this is just not looking super great. So typically with this sort of shadow, I would just like to have a softer, fluffier crease brush. And instead her crease brushes are all just a little bit dense for my liking. But the show must go on, so let's go in with some of this purple shade just on the outer portion. I'm going to use the worker style brush just to first place it, and then again I'm going into that crease brush for buffing things out. But yeah, today's look is a very good reminder to me of why I don't normally start out my eye looks with any of my Sonia G brushes. Sonia G has talked about how she really loves using Natasha Denona shadows, and Natasha Denona does a similar thing where she first packs on the pigment and then she blends it out instead of kind of building up the pigment gradually. And so if you like that sort of technique, I think that these brushes might work for you. But for me personally, I just tend to struggle with them. I really don't know what is happening right here. That is something that normally doesn't happen to me, but like, just look how crazy patchy this is looking. Ugh. Well, let's give up on the mattes for now and return to that later. So moving on to brushes I do like from Sonia G. So we have these two, which are good at packing on pigment. So we have the Builder from the Lotus set. This is one of my all-time favorite brushes from Sonia G. I love this for packing shadows on the eyelids and also for the lower lash line area. And then here's the Flat Definer from her Keyaki set. This is basically a much smaller version of the Builder. Similar to it, you can use this to pack on shadow, especially in smaller areas, but also to apply shadow on the lower lash line. So for today's look, I'm going to first just go into some of this shade and put it on the inner thirds using the Flat Definer. This is kind of the perfect shape for that inner third area that's a little bit smaller. And I love this when traveling because it's just such a versatile brush. Takes a little bit more time than if you had a larger packer brush, but it can just do the whole eye very precisely. And then shifting over to this Builder brush, I'm going to take some of this red shade and just kind of sweep this all over the eye. I don't know when this video is coming out, but as I'm filming this, Valentine's Day is just around the corner, so that's one of the inspirations for today's look and also for my outfit. So I just love how easily this picks things up. Personally, I actually normally go in with fingers with Pat McGrath shadows, so that's my typical preference. But if you are someone who doesn't like using your fingers, this will definitely do a good job of applying the product all over the eyes. And then flipping that over, I'm going into this shade over here, which is like my favorite shade in the palette, and just applying this to the center, since I do just want a little bit more glow there. So I know it's been a while since I've used my Pat McGrath palettes, which is a bit of a travesty, but I am enjoying how these shadows are applying. Alrighty, so now I'm going to go back into that Blender Pro and try to just smooth some of these edges because it's still looking a bit messy. And then I'm going to go into that aubergine shade and try to deepen up the outer corners. And it's still very messy out here, but it's looking a little bit better at least. I don't know how much I'm really going to be able to fix that area, unfortunately. Dipping back into the lighter brown, I'm just going to try to cover up some of that patchiness if possible. Further diffuse the line in the crease. Alrighty, that's probably the best we're going to get in terms of that crease area, which is honestly not great, but we'll keep rolling with it. So in addition to the laydown, I do have Sonia G brushes that I really like for the lower lash line. So these are the smaller eye brushes that I have from her. Let me first just talk about the ones I don't like to get those out of the way. So I have her Smudger one over here, and then I also have her Pencil Pro. These two I pretty much never use. These are kind of older in her line. I actually don't even know if she still sells these. But the Smudger Pro, I find that even though it's kind of a chubby smudger brush, the top of it is just a little bit too pokey, and so it's not that comfortable on the lash line, and the sort of line it draws is a little bit more precise than what I really want. So I don't know, I'll show you guys. It kind of picks up a lot of product, and then it's not the most comfortable gliding on the lower lash line. I mean, it does the job, like, you know, that looks great, but compared to some of the other brushes, it's just a little bit pokey. Now for the Pencil Pro, I just find that I don't really have good use for this. It's a little bit too big for lower lash line placement for me, I find. Again, it's a little spiky. It sort of drags along that area. It can get the job done, but it's just not very soft for this purpose. And then it's a little bit too precise for inner corner highlight. So instead, my favorite brush from her for the lower lash line is actually the Soft Definer brush. You can see it has a cute little tip here, and it's overall a pretty soft brush. And so for that sensitive part of the lower lash line, I feel like it's really perfect. You can use it mostly for kind of a softer application of shadow down here. You can see it just adds a little bit of haziness to that area, and it's very soft, so I don't feel like there's any dragging at all with this brush. There's also this detail brush that comes in her Keyaki set. You can use this with liquids and creams as well. I don't actually use this that much. It does have a nice point similar to the Soft Definer, but you can see it's a lot chubbier than the Soft Definer. So typically this is just a little bit too big for my uses, but you can definitely get a pretty good line down there as well. And if you are someone who likes to use liquid shadows, this is pretty good for that lower lash line area. Now, when it comes to applying shimmers to the lower lash line, this is where I go back in with either the flat definer or the worker brush, because I find that the cross section for these brushes is perfect for that laydown. So just to show you guys with the builder brush, I'm going to just take some of this shade and sweep this along the lower lash line. So it's very soft, but very good at placing that pigment. And if I want something more precise, then the flat definer can similarly just sort of get in there and place the product. And then when it comes to inner corner highlight, my all-time favorite brush has to be the Mini Booster. I do have two of these, one in the Keyaki set that's undyed and one in her classic line, which is dyed. And I've just never found a brush that's as good for inner corner highlight as this one. It does that perfect sort of diffused effect where it doesn't look like you just have a pinpoint of light shadow there. As you can see, it looks nicely diffused. This is also really excellent for brow bone highlight. So even though I don't use this for any other purpose, I end up always bringing this with me just because whenever I use another brush for these sorts of around the eye highlight purposes, I just don't like how it looks. So this is really the only brush I like using for that kind of purpose. But you see how it just, there's no kind of harsh line where the highlight starts or ends, which is what I'm looking for when it comes to especially the inner corner area. And before I finish off this look, I realized I forgot to apply highlighter earlier. So let's do that. I'm gonna just go into that elephant palette again. And let me show you guys actually the detail brush on this side. So you can see how this is kind of the perfect size and shape just for that area. You can do kind of a thicker band or a thinner band. Similarly with the Detail Pro, it's a very lovely size and shape for highlight as well. This one is especially good for highlighting the nose because it's a little bit smaller. So there you go. You can see how that added quite a bit more dimension. So I'm gonna go off camera, finish off the look, and be back with my overall thoughts. So here we have the final look. What do you guys think? So I actually really like how this turned out. Other than the lingering problems with blending out that crease area, I think everything else looks really, really great. And like I mentioned at the top, I will have the products all linked down below in case you're curious what's on my face. But on the whole, I would say that Sonia G is an amazing brand that I would highly recommend you guys check out if you haven't already. Side note, this is one of the brush holders that she sells. This is extremely beautiful and luxe as well. So if you guys are interested in some place to store your brushes, this is great. This is not all of my brushes, but I put some back in here just so you guys could see what it looks like. In terms of comparing Sonia G to other brands, I would say the main differences are that she basically exclusively uses goat hair. So if you are someone who likes more like squirrel hair, fox hair, other sorts of bristle types, then you might be better off checking out some of the Japanese brands like Hakuhodo, Chikuhodo, or other brands that you can find on Fude Beauty. In general, her style of brush is more suited for kind of Western style makeup application. And what I mean by that is when I shop for Japanese makeup brushes in Japan, typically the style is a much more wispy type of application where you're going to be applying a lot more light layers to the face, and there's not necessarily as much stiffness or buffing potential with a lot of those brushes. Whereas in part because she uses goat hair, but also just based on the shapes that Sonia G curates, they tend to have a lot more of that buffing potential and also a lot more different shapes and sizes for precise application of very specific products. Personally, my favorite Sonia G brushes tend to be for the face area. I think she just has a really amazing selection of different options for those sorts of application styles. In terms of the eye area, I really like her brushes for building up shadows and for lower lash line work. But the one area I find that's kind of lacking is in the crease area. And then when it comes to liquids and creams, I do think she has some of the best brushes on the market from a luxury perspective, but it's just not my cup of tea in terms of the process of having to wash them out. And so I personally tend to go for synthetic brushes instead for that use case. Let me know though what you guys think about Sonia G brushes, if you guys have any favorites. I am constantly increasing my Sonia G collection with each of her releases, so I'm sure this will just keep on growing from here on out. But I really love her products. I think she has a really nice eye for artistry and for unique shapes and functionality. So I'm always looking forward to seeing what she comes out with next. So that's it for today's video. If you guys like this video, please give it a thumbs up, and if you haven't already, please subscribe to my channel. Thank you all so much for joining me today, and I'll catch you next time. Bye!